Welcome back to the next episode of Road to Salt. So good to be back with you guys this morning, this afternoon, wherever you're watching from. So excited you're here. The Road to Salt, if you've been a part of this before or you're brand new, is really here to help equip, inspire, and connect those of you who work day in, day out in the creative community here of the local church. So we just want to come alongside you today. We want to wrap our arms around you. We want to have a conversation. And so I say conversation because I want this to not just be you sitting back, eating whatever lunch you're eating a part of today. We want you to engage. So if you see in the chat, there's going to be some polls, there's going to be some questions come up. I want you to engage. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you're resonating with in the conversation we're going to have today. But the most important thing is when you have a question or you have a thought or you have an idea that you want to have a part of the conversation, would you just throw it in the chat? Would you mention a little bit about that? And then we'll hopefully have a live Q&A at the end with all those questions and get them all answered. I want to jump right into today's topic so that we maximize the use of Q&A. We have an incredible friend to the SALT community. He is one of our favorite all-time speakers every year at conference. We're so honored to have him not only here today, but many of the past years at SALT conference. He is a dear friend of the church. He's been serving in creative ministry for over almost 20 years. That's like 2 decades of church work. That's crazy to me. He was a communications pastor for the longest time, just recently stepped out to sort of step into more of a mentoring, coaching, pastoring roles of communications pastors and leaders. And so he has a huge heart for the church. He's not only a creative coach, he's also an author of the book Rethink Communications. Got our friend Phil Bowdle in the house today. So excited. Phil, how are you doing, my man?
It's good to be here today.
Dude, so good to have you. We're talking today about a topic that I think will impact almost everyone watching this. I know that in the poll that we just ran, we know that some of you are maybe dealing with this in your church. You've also maybe are a leader and you're trying to help figure out, how do you not handle this? But the idea of sort of handling unrealistic expectations from leadership, or as a leader, how do we not set those unrealistic expectations? I mean, I think, listen, there's a common trait that like everyone who's watching this, anyone who works in creative or technical ministries, they're kind of expected to be magicians in their organization, right? And every meeting, every conversation, I mean, I don't know how many of you have sort of gotten that last minute phone call from your boss or your pastor who are like, oh, you're the creative, pull a rabbit out of your hat, ready, go. It's like a trick, right? that like we're called to do on demand or something. I want you to just give maybe a little bit of a preview of kind of this and how you see this being such an important topic that we need to be talking about today in this webinar.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that creative leaders are tasked with, right? Like there's so many things that have always been important and feel especially important in making church happen week in and week out right now. And what I always feel for and resonate with for creative leaders is like, if you're in creative ministry, you're at the very front line of unreasonable expectations. Like it's always a high pressure role. Everybody notices when something goes wrong. I mean, what's the first thing that happens when there's a sound issue or something? All the heads go out and look back towards, you or somebody. I mean, everybody notices when something goes wrong. And so what happens is it feels like in these roles in particular, it just feels like you have to be a unicorn to be successful in it. For production leaders, you feel like you've got to be a tech expert that knows way more than maybe but also a leadership guru that can build a team of 20 people of volunteers that have never touched a soundboard before or never done what they've done before. And those are two often opposing things that make you good at one. It can often be a challenge on another. And it just feels like I got to be a unicorn to do what it takes in this role. Or worship pastors trying to be great on stage and lead a great ministry, but also have a theological degree and know as much as the other pastors as well in their own lanes. And poor communications people, especially over COVID, of not only do you need to be the person that everybody goes to make their things happen, but you have to know social media, website design, video storytelling, marketing, PR. You have to be a visionary. You also have to build a whole team, and often do that in a seat all by yourself of trying to pull this thing off. So I think it's really important today to dig into it. Certainly why I know we're passionate about this conversation is I think we're at a breaking point. I think there's a lot of people that I know I'm talking to. I know a lot of people that are probably listening today that are in that pressure cooker of an environment And it's maybe to no fault of anybody, but it's just the reality of what ministry looks like right now, where they're feeling like, okay, something's got to change for me to be able to stay in the game. And I mean, I know there's so many leaders that I talk to now that I'm working with or coaching that are brand new to their role, because there's been so much change over the last couple of years. Of all of a sudden, they may be stepping up into a new role, leading new areas that they haven't led before, or stepping into a role that they've never done in full-time ministry for a long time, and it feels like an impossible task of doing less with more, of less staff or less time, less resources, all that. So I think it's important to dig into it, because I think that's the current reality, but it doesn't have to be the future that we live in. But it's going to take us leaning into it and doing some things proactively to be able to help get out of that chaos cycle and break some of those unrealistic expectations and set a good path forward for how we can do ministry.
I love that. And you're not kidding. I mean, every single person here has to wear about 20 or 30 different hats, and you got to know everything in the organization. But I want to just take a second and not go much further and say, but you also have to be human. You have to be you. You have to be exactly who God called you to be. And I don't want you to miss that there, just because that pressure exists doesn't mean that Luke and Phil here are going to just say, oh, you got to actually live up to that. That's part of this conversation, is how do we create healthy rhythms that sort of break the unrealistic expectations. So we were talking ahead of time, Phil, and you really said that this kind of boils down to like 3 different groups. Will you kind of break down just kind of where do these unrealistic expectations kind of come from as you're seeing it right now?
Yeah, I really see it come to play in 3 different areas. There's expectations from leaders above us, so from our leaders, expectations from peers, the people that we're serving with, the people that are around us. And honestly, maybe the worst one is expectations that we hold ourselves to. And all of those have some mines in the minefield that we got to navigate and work through. But I think those are the 3 biggest categories and areas that we got to dig into.
All right, so let's just jump right in. Let's jump into leaders. I think if I had to take a guess, the most number of attendees that come to SALT are wrestling with this level of unrealistic expectations. There may be a leader listening to this right now who is going to gain from this conversation, but I want to talk about your leader has set before you some unrealistic expectation. This could be you guys have been tracking down the road of a specific sermon series, and the pastor, like the Thursday before Sunday, or maybe some of you the Saturday before Sunday, changes it on you, and now you're expected to cancel all your family plans and sort of totally reinvent the wheel. Talk a little bit about that group.
Yeah, real easy to talk through, right? Because I know everything you're talking about. I'm like, I think I've had that exact scenario in my career and in my ministry, and I know many of you listening today have been in that seat of trying to pull the rabbit out of the hat, saying, "How in the world am I going to try to pull this thing off?" I was there, really personally. Like, I was at that spot where, to no fault of anybody, it was really getting to a boiling point for me about 2 years into my ministry as a communications director, where I hit that point where I was wondering, am I going to be able to keep at this? Am I going to be able to stay in ministry, or am I on my way to burning out? And I had this moment, Luke, where I was in my office and I was having a team meeting with myself, because that was my team. It was just me pulling off all the things. So
I'm sure no one here is the solo creative, right?
Nobody, of course not. No.
Did you change seats too? Like,
I probably should have. So yeah, I wanted to get out of the seat at that moment, but I was having that moment, and I remember, like, those dialogues you have with yourself of just saying, where you're talking to God, like, okay, God, you brought me here. What are you going to do about it? Because surely you didn't bring me here to burn out. Surely you didn't bring me here just to try to do some tasks and try to work myself to death and try to and get somebody else in here, right? Like, so I was having this dialogue with God, and it was, what I was saying was like, okay, when are the leaders around me going to come around and see how messed up this is? When are the leaders going to come in and say, hey, we got to take some of these things off your plate, or we got to hire more people, or we got to figure out some systems and some rhythms that are sustainable for you and for our staff and for our team and all that. And I was kept on thinking about all the people that were supposed to come in and do the job, that it really did hit me in that moment, gracefully, kindly, like God nudging me on the shoulder, like, I thought that's why I brought you here, Phil. Actually, it was you're pointing the finger at everybody else, but I actually called you to help lead through that. I called you to lead the charge and be able to help, not lead to be over people, to lead and serve with people. And it's going to take me stepping up in my leadership and being far more proactive instead of reacting to everybody else. And that was a game changer moment of, instead of putting the spotlight on everybody else, it was like putting the mirror up to myself saying, okay, God, if you called me to this, you're gonna give me what it takes to be able to lead through this. And for me, I got to lead myself well so that I can actually lead a ministry well and actually get things where I need to go. And so dealing with the leaders above me started with me, because I realized the only one that can navigate unreasonable expectations for you is you. So it's going to take you to deal with what you deal with every day. And so I think speaking to the leaders above us and that unreasonable expectations happen. I mean, one thing I would say is it is okay for your boss or for your leader to give you direction. Like that actually is their job more often than not. And we sometimes forget that. And guess what? Most of those leaders that are giving us direction are dealing with unreasonable expectations themselves. Like my dad was a pastor. I know the expectations people had on him to be a unicorn, to be the best pastor, speaker, administrator, staff leader, all those things. So we all have this. We're all dealing with it. For us, at dealing with the leaders above us, it's our job to actually clarify the expectations and communicate what it's going to take to make it happen. And so a couple of things that, just getting really practical on things that might help the leaders listening to this today, that I found some breakthrough with is, often when that moment happens where you're saying, okay, how in the world am I going to pull this off? Our tendency is when that project comes to us, we're thinking right away with, okay, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? We jump right to that. But often in those conversations, we often overlook the why, and we don't actually understand the why of the project, the why of the expectation that's been given to us. So I think the first thing that I would encourage everybody to do whenever that moment happens is to first just take a deep breath and realize this is not you versus that person. It is you with that person. That has to be our posture. Because when it becomes us versus them, it's really hard to recover from that. It really is, especially even just how we're helping steward our own emotions and energy through it. So it's got to be us with them. And the best thing that you can do is just ask a couple questions like, hey, for this project, before we dig into how I'm going to pull this off, I'd love to just know, what's the win for this? What's on your heart, pastor? Or leader, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Or is there something that you're trying to pull off with this that I can make sure I understand as I work through this with you? So what's the win is a really simple but very powerful question, because sometimes we jump right to the how and the why and the what, but we realize that I've learned that prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. So we can often jump right to diagnosing a problem that we think we see, but it's actually the wrong problem. And we're not, our energy is going to be wasted because we're not trying to solve the right thing to get the win that pastor, that leader's trying to accomplish. So asking what's the win, and then
I want to interject real quick.
Yeah.
What I love about that question that you're asking is, I think, let me say it this way. When we ask the question why, there's so much shame attached to that question. When you're saying, what is the win? It is a very open, positive, freeing question to say, would you give me more perspective as to what you just asked me? Because I may be missing something, right? Because the truth of the matter is they may not fully understand all the steps of what they just said or what the leader just sort of outlined. But I love the freedom and the way you phrase that question.
Exactly, because most likely the person you're talking to, they likely don't know what it's going to take off to pull that win, but they do have a picture in mind of what they're hoping to accomplish. So it's your job to help clarify that and then be able to speak into it to say, hey, let's set some realistic expectations, because we all know we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And you've probably seen that picture of you can pick two, you can have fast, cheap, or great, pick two. And we're all trying to do that at some level. Okay, you need it by Saturday. We have no money. We have no team. So that's where those unrealistic expectations come to play. So it's up for us sometimes to use our superpowers as creatives to actually solve a problem in a creative way that might be fast and cheap but not great, or it might be fast and great but not cheap, or whatever. Like we can work through that, because that's what we do. We solve problems, but we got to make sure we're solving the right problem, and then clarify those expectations with them. Because I don't know many top leaders that are leading a big organization or leading a staff that are trying to be unrealistic. I don't talk to many of them, but I do talk to a lot to say, hey, I don't know what it takes to pull off this video. I don't know what it takes to pull off this website or this opener in the service, but I do have a heart for what we're trying to do, and I need my team to be able to work with me to help clarify that. So it's for us to be able to help clarify those questions and lead with them, and then set realistic expectations so that we can keep in two-way conversation, because it's us with them. It's not us against them.
I love it. And to go back to kind of that comment, you are also required to be a human in your role, which means, one of the things we tell clients that we work with a lot outside of the SALT sort of window is treat us like a human and we'll treat you like a human. We'll have grace when things come last minute, but treat us like a robot and expect us to just sort of execute these last minute demands, and we may have to treat you like a robot with extra surprise charges or delays in the end product or something like that. I love this. I also want to go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, part of when that's your posture, and when you're treating each other like humans that both have unrealistic expectations on ourselves, it allows us to have open-ended conversation around solutions that accomplish that win.
Yeah,
I know a lot of times for me, when feels like an impossible situation, I had to answer bring up conversations like, hey, are you open to fill in the blank? Or, hey, if with this yes, does that mean that, are you okay saying no to this? Or to accomplish this, our team's going to need this to make sure that we're not burning them out or putting them in an unrealistic situation. Are you open to that? Like, they need those solutions. And most of the time they'll give you clarity, or they'll lean on you to say, hey, make a call on that. But it's up to us to lead and steward the area well to know what it's going to take to accomplish that win.
I love that. And my friend Bill, who served in a church in St. Louis for decades, he used to always say no is like one of the most unspiritually healthy responses we can give to a leader. And so what he was always trying to coach his team was to say yes, but. Yes, I can accomplish this in this crazy, unrealistic, expected timeline you've given me, but here's some of the other things that you've asked me to do that may not be able to happen. And it was almost a way of, he would flip the conversation, kind of what you were saying, of like, what's the win in this? To sort of say, what's the priority? You've given me 4 things I've got to get done before Sunday. Which of these is your number one priority? And it kind of helps put the leader back in the role that they were called to, of helping cast vision, helping set the rhythm, helping sort of establish those priorities so that we don't get too buried. I wanted to call this out, Phil, because there was a poll that we ran while you were talking on a scale of 1 to 5. How do you feel your boss understands your role? I think it's fascinating. I'm not going to go through all the results because everybody who's watching this can see this, but over 60% of the people watching this right now say vaguely, or they get the idea, aka 2 or 3 out of 5. And so how much of this leaders setting unrealistic expectations is simply because they don't fully understand the role? Do you ever see that in sort of all the coaching that you've done?
Oh, yeah. I mean, often one of my favorite questions to ask in a team environment is, hey, what is your job and what do people think your job is? And it's often, well, my job is I'm a communications director. I oversee all messaging and communications of the church. It's like, well, what do people think you do? It's like, they think I do the bulletin, or they think that I, answer the church-wide emails. What do they think you do? We just think you get up on Sunday and lead some songs, and then you kind of mess around the rest of the way. That's what I thought you did. So, yeah, I definitely see that. But honestly, what I wrestle with, Luke, is I don't think we understand the role of most of the leaders around us either. And I think that's okay, as long as there's trust over suspicion, and as long as that's leaning into partnering with these ministry leaders to say, hey, I want you to succeed, and I know that you want me to as well too. So here's how we can work through this together. I don't need somebody to know everything that I do, but I do want them to know my why. I do want them to know, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and here's how I want to help you do the same on that. So I think as long as we have that foundation, it's okay if they don't know every bullet on your job description, because that's probably unrealistic there as well.
Well, and what's funny is they probably made your job description, so it's probably easy for you to think they know everything that you're doing, but there's probably been a lot of time passed, and they're in their own wheel of getting things done and having to meet deadlines and stuff like that. All right, just a reminder, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We would love to engage very specific situations that you're in or questions you have as this conversation goes. Let's transition now, Phil, to the second group, peers. Talk a little about what are unrealistic expectations that come from peers. What do those look like?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I know all of us are always dealing with juggling text messages and emails and meetings and requests with everybody else's priorities, which means the good news is that in creative ministry, you're needed because you are involved and touch everything that most likely is happening in the church. But that often does put you in that impossible situation where not only are you dealing with the pressure of the things that the leaders need above you that don't have this perspective you have, but now you have everybody coming to you to say, hey, I need this, I need this, I need this. And the challenge is everybody thinks their thing is the thing. It's the most important thing that should be the feature of it all. And you are often holding the balance of realizing you can't be all things to all people. And so I think a couple proactive solutions that you can be thinking about when dealing with the expectations of those around you and the peers that you're working with is you actually have to get proactive about your time and your ministry, because most ministry, like most of us that are working, there's some things that we're proactively driving that are that need to be pulled off by the direction you're setting. And then there's some service related things that you're doing to help come alongside others and support others. A production director, you're setting up every service, doing things that nobody knows you're doing, but you're also working with and collaborating with other leaders that say, hey, let me help you and support you in what you're doing. So there's two sides, but what happens a lot is that we wait on everybody else's priorities to come to us, and we just try to get our way through the checklist, and we crowd out the actually important things with the most urgent things, and that's where we get into that cycle of burnout.
Or so I would go even further to say someone else's procrastination becomes your prioritization because they've made their urgent, now you're urgent, right?
Exactly. And we've all been there, but I mean, the way that I like to think of how we can get proactive around that side is I like to think of time like a budget. If you're building a budget around a certain amount of dollars, like you have to look at it all together and say, am I spending the most time on the urgent things or the most important things? And you can only, you got to actually have a plan for it because it will spend itself. And plenty of people are more than happy to take all the time or all the resources you have. So to do that, one of my favorite things it's simple, but it's become foundational in a lot of the people that I coach is I actually just walk through creating a weekly rhythm for everybody. And that actually helps us to know that we are blocking off time for the most important things that need to happen in the course of a week, so that we're not assuming that we have 40 or 45 hours to serve everybody else, but we know here's the block of time that I have to best steward the time to serve the peers around us and the leaders above us, to make sure I'm being a good steward of my role. And so I think it's being proactive around your time, focusing on not just the urgent but the important. But I think that probably the thing that took me longer than I wish it took me to learn is expectations go both ways. The same way with leaders above us, the peers that we're working with, a lot of times there's some things that they need from you. That's why they're coming to you to get help or whatever. But there's also some things that you need from them to be able to accomplish their win. And so what I found that was really helpful in leading creative ministry is just saying, before a decision's made, before things are moving forward, we'll say, hey, here's what you can count on from me. I'm going to own this, this, and this. For me to own that, to pull that off, here's what I'm expecting from you. I'm going to need this content. I'm going to need this, this person. I'm going to need this contact. I'm going to need your team to help focus on this so that we can work through this together. So it's two-way conversations, expectations of what you're expecting from me and what I'm expecting from you. And I know I had to learn that the hard way, because a lot of times it would be hey, can we do this new website and this new video by next Saturday? It's like, I don't want to say no again. Yes, we'll figure it out. And I'm sitting, and then on the Thursday before the deadline, I'm still waiting on all the things that I need to pull that off. And that's not realistic. That's just frustrating. And so it's easier to hold people to expectations for yourself and for them when you make that clear at the beginning, to say, hey, to pull this off, for us to accomplish this together, here's what you can expect from me, and I'm going to own it. Here's what I'm expecting from you, and let's lean into this together.
I love it. And it's not just rhythms for your own schedule, for your own benefit. I think the rhythms of your schedule, you can also build rhythms to help protect against sort of reactive responses to these questions. I mean, I can think of it in our organization, we call it death by got a minute meetings, right? Where you may walk across the hall and go, got a minute? And that minute very quickly becomes 15, 20, 30. And now you realize, oh my gosh, the hour I had blocked out to get X accomplished, I didn't even touch it. And so I think there's a little bit of an encouragement on a practical level of saying, don't respond right away. Say, great, I wrote it down, I'll get back to you. That way they get trained to go, oh, if I go to him, he's not gonna have the answer anyway, or she's not gonna have the answer anyway, so I should just email him, or I should just, Slack her. I'll also...
same thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so my version of that was that I know you're busy, but and that same idea. And so part of the secret of creating a weekly rhythm is actually blocking things off on your calendar. So when somebody says, hey, I know you're busy, but like, hey, what are you wanting to hit on? Hey, let's grab 30 minutes here, and pulling up your calendar to show, hey, you aren't the only priority, but I do want to value you and your time. So let's find a time that works for you and works for me. It was a subtle thing, but it was something that let people know you have a proactive plan for what's on your plate.
I think we just lost your audio. So while we're trying to get your audio back, Phil, I want to tell this one quick story because I think it connects to both leaders and peers. And I went to this leadership conference once, and the speaker gave this analogy. He said, anytime someone walks into your office, I want you to always assume or always imagine that there is a monkey sort of on their shoulder, and the moment that they explain their problem or their situation or the challenge that they're facing, that monkey has just jumped from their shoulder onto your desk. And the leader went on to essentially say, if you as the person receiving this problem do not make sure that that monkey leaves in a cage walking out of your office, you will eventually be managing a zoo by the end of the day. And I think it's the exact same thing of other people's priorities, or even if you are a leader, that is sometimes a way to help navigate in that moment, really briefly, just say, hey, let's help solve this problem. Let me give you some things to think about, but then have them take that monkey back out. Otherwise, your entire day gets ruined because of all the other people's misprioritization.
That's good.
All right, so let's move on. Again, don't forget, put your questions in the chat. We're going to get to those. Third group, ourselves. When you said this earlier, I was like, wow, how do we maybe create unrealistic expectations for ourselves?
In so many ways, unfortunately, there's so many different ways that we are hard on ourselves. And I think some of those expectations we hold ourselves to are that we can do it all, which leads to burnout. We think we can pull it off if we've got more time in the day than we realize. And I think we got to remind ourselves that God didn't call you to ministry to burn out. He didn't put you in your seat. He didn't give you the opportunity. He didn't have a plan for you and a purpose for you to burn out. And so I think if that's a narrative that you're living in, that you feel like you can work your way through every task, everything that you've got with, and that's leading to burnout, like you don't have to stay there. So I think there's that side of that expectation of that we can do it all. But I think the other side that's probably just as dangerous for people that are stepping into new roles is that it's that expectation that we deal with that we're going to be perfect at our role, and that leads to that imposter syndrome. I know stepping in, a lot of young people in their 20s stepping into ministry, like they have this pressure on themselves, like they've done this job forever. It's like, bro, you haven't led a team before. That's okay. You don't have to live in that imposter syndrome, assuming that you know it all or feeling the pressure that you're supposed to. When that's not an expectation that's fair for you and that anybody can put on you and stuff. So I think a couple of questions I know I've asked myself that I ask others too is just around that is, are you being kind to yourself? I had a counselor tell me that once, like, are you actually being kind to yourself? I'm like, no, I'm an Enneagram 1 perfectionist. I can tell you 100 different things that I want to do differently or change for myself. Like, that is not something that I am good at. I am not being kind to myself. And I think if we can lean into that more and actually know that God is kind with us. So I think it allows us to be kind to ourselves and still hold ourselves to a high standard, but also just in moments, we just got to give ourselves some grace and some kindness. Another one is, Are you chasing progress or perfection?
Oh,
Are you chasing that desire of realizing, hey, I'm better at leading worship this Sunday than I was last Sunday because I was focused on this. You may not say, was I perfect this week? You're probably never going to say yes. But if you can say, hey, I'm making progress, that's all that we can do. And goodness, as leaders who are leading others, please remind them of that as well too, to chase progress over perfection. That is a tension again for me. I'm that leader that if I go into a service environment, whether it's in my church or anywhere else, I can easily come up with a list of 15 things that could be better or were not perfect from my perspective. But that doesn't actually help anybody. It's going to be saying, hey, here's one or two things that we can do that might help us make some progress to best serve the people we're trying to serve on that. So we got to remind ourselves for ourselves and for the people that may be looking to us for leadership to say, here's what progress looks like, and let's chase that over perfection. Another one is, are you focusing on being faithful or fruitful? We cannot control fruitfulness. We can't control what God always does with our ministry, but we can control, are we being faithful with the time, the talent, the resources, the margin that God has put in our hands? Are we being faithful with that and allowing God to bring the fruit on that? And, I think as well, too, the other one is just, am I resting this week? Like, is there a time where you're turning it off to realize that God does not depend on you to make the world spin around? And he can actually do okay with you realizing that you don't have to play savior because we have one. So we can rest because it's not all depending on us. And when we act like it depends on us, we're not only not being kind to ourselves and holding ourselves to unreasonable expectations, we are actually tricking ourselves into being more important than we actually are. And there's a freedom that comes with that when we realize I don't have to be all things to all people. I can actually hold myself to the expectations of doing the best I can with what I have and being faithful instead of focusing on all the things that I can't be.
I love this. There's so much to go off of. I think you're so right in sort of hitting this idea that there's a myth in culture. There's a myth, I think, in the church world that we have to be perfect. And yet God never called us that way. In fact, you and I have had this conversation numerous times at conference that, perfect isn't the measure of God, because God says, or Paul wrote in Ephesians, that you were made to do good works. And it's the same sort of root concept of what God said when he made us. And so often we think that, perfect is what God wants because perfect is what God makes. And yet he made us able to sin. And so if he made us able to sin, then maybe perfection's not his goal. Maybe it's just having a posture of saying, Lord, I want to do the best I can. I want to be faithful to the gifts that you've given me. I love that idea of faithfulness versus fruitfulness. And just to say, I'm going to make the most of the time I'm given, of the opportunity I'm given, of the skills I was given. I think that imposter syndrome, no matter what role we're in, we could easily compare ourselves to the church member down the or the staff member down the street, or the other church is not doing exactly, or whatever. And so I love this. So thanks for freeing that up. Because I do think we probably put more than anybody else, and that perspective or that sort of lens that we see that through is why we think it may come from peers or leaders even that much more, because we've put it on ourselves. All right, let's jump into questions because the chat has lit up. And so if you're okay, let's kind of put you on the spot a little bit.
Let's do it.
A lot of conversation here around this whole us versus them. So I want to kind of maybe start there, and then we'll get to some of these other questions. What are like 2 or 3 sort of mental tricks to maybe shift your mindset away from an us versus them mindset? Do you have anything practical you can share there?
I think a lot of it starts, again, just with our posture of somebody doesn't have to always win. Like, it's not, if the us versus them often comes from this positional authority side that shouldn't actually be a value in church and creative ministry. Like, we should all have the value of the best idea wins. We should have the posture that we're in it together, and that the posture that it's not about us. So if it's about you getting your way, getting your preference all the time, like, it's gonna create that us versus them. But if our posture is open-handed to say, hey, I want what's best for us, I want that person to win, I know they want me to win as well too, I think that kind of posture leads to the best results and the best relationships. And sometimes for you to be able to get more of a voice, or more of to be able to get more for you to be able to get more of your way, if you will, for people to understand you, it takes you actually proving to the leaders around you to say, hey, it doesn't have to be about me. And hey, I might not agree with this, but let's try it. I'm with you. Let's figure it out. Like it's a partnership in this. And so it doesn't have to be, it's really hard to recover, like I said, if you start making it about you always having to win. And goodness, the front lines, like I said, are creative ministry, because there's always preference conversations. There's always decisions that have to be made. There's 1,000 decisions that are made every single service you put on that. So if we're trying to win that battle, we're going to lose it.
I love that. I'll give one little insight. There's a leader in an organization who has made sure that he takes time to hear from every single person on the team, what is your vision? What is your goal in our organization? Where do you ultimately want to get to? Which helps, I think, make this mindset about us. Hey, my job is to help you get to where you want to be. And in turn, I'm going to maybe ask some things of you, but I want to have that perspective before I sort of ask those. That's great.
That's good.
All right, Steve asked a little while back in the chat here, how do I handle establishing boundaries from serving or personal time? I'm sure that there is a lot of people who feel like there's a difference between work and sort of the service ministry, right? I mean, what church person actually only works 40 hours a week? How do you maybe help, balance that boundary of personal time, family time, while serving a ministry?
Yeah, Steve, great question. And you don't have to do that in isolation. I think the best way to do that is to wrestle with the tension with your leaders, to say, hey, I'm struggling with this right now, and I want you to know I'm struggling with it. Like for me personally, if I'm having that conversation, I'm saying, hey, I love to work, and I probably love to work too much. And so, leader, I need your help to know, like, I am going to be really intentional about, for me, and when I was in my creative arts pastor role, I'm going to be really intentional about Friday evening to Saturday evening to turn off notifications and turn that off, because I need help and I need accountability to be fully focused on my family. Can you help me with that? And how you can help me is, if there's an emergency, I understand that happens. But if it's not an emergency, do you mind just slacking me or send me a message on that so that I can make sure I'm being fully present on that? Inviting somebody into the tension means that they can be aware that it's not just you not trying to work, or it's not you getting out of things. It's you saying, hey, I want to be great at my role, and I also want to be a great dad, or a great husband, or a great wife. And so invite them into that and actually set those boundaries, because nobody's going to set them for you. And if they aren't aware of them, they're probably going to violate them on that, because their own boundaries may look different than yours. So invite them into the conversation, lean into it with them, be vulnerable as well too. And when that moment happens where it's violated, to say, hey, just remind them back to that conversation where you're saying, hey, I'm so sorry I was a little bit late. Just remind, like, I'm really trying to focus on that time to be my Sabbath day on that. So I apologize that late, but as soon as Saturday evening hit it, and as soon as I saw it, I responded. Like, just invite them into the tension, and more often than not, they're going to give you the grace that you need.
Yeah, and I think the more often you do that, the more you'll start seeing that rhythm be set in your organization. Yep. Even as someone who's not a leader, you can set the pace of those sorts of conversations. So I love that encouragement. All right, Devin asked.
And you can do the same for the person you lead too. You can say, when is your Sabbath day?
Yeah,
When's that time that you need to be, so that you can be aware that you're not violating the thing you don't want other people to violate for you.
Yeah, I love that. All right, Devin asked this. What are some tips you have on working with rogue ministries or ministry leaders? You've tried to rope them in, following your process, but they just keep doing things themselves instead of trying to partner with you or your ministry to communicate their events.
Yes. That the phrase that I often use on that lovingly is, hey, I know, rogue ministry leader, all the things you want to call them. I know, leader, like, that you don't report to me, but I know you're accountable to me with how we do communications or production or whatever, because I'm held accountable to how that works for us as a church. And here are our values for how we approach that. And here's where our values are getting violated. And that's where I need you to know that's not going to work for us. Not because I don't want you to have what you need, but I can't be a good steward of the ministry that we're trying to lead collectively as a church if we keep on running into this. So you don't lead with that the first time. You assume that they're trying their best and lean into that with them and try to help them get what they need. But there's always that ministry, right? There's always that one where you're like, oh, again, and so that is where you sometimes do need to put your foot down a little bit with two lines of communication to still try to help serve them well, but to let them know you're not serving the people you're trying to serve well in your congregation by violating those values that you may have on that.
What would you say to this organizational leader to, I guess my question I'm trying to process is it's great when you can say that, but if they continue to be rogue, how long do you let it go before you elevate it to sort of the next level of leadership, whether that's senior pastor or an elder or somebody else? Because at some point, you know, especially if you're organizationally equal, right? I'm thinking of like children's ministry leader and maybe communications leader. If you're organizationally the same level, they may not feel like they have to respond to your process. When do you elevate that? How long do you give it?
I think first is confirming the values that you're working on with your boss, with your leader, without naming names. You don't need, it's not a us versus them. So it may be a value around planning ahead and somebody's violating that. You're not saying, hey, children's ministry is doing this again. You're good with me telling them no, right? Like, no, it's saying, hey, I want to make sure you know, like, these are the values I'm working off of for how we plan ahead. I just had to share with the ministry that wasn't going to work. I just want to make sure that we are still on the same page so that if that comes up, that we're staying in communication. That often triggers some things to let them know, okay, this is, yes, if I hear about that, even though I don't know where it's coming from, yes, I have your back. Yes, we're leading through the right thing. And if that's a one-time thing, it's one thing. You can just make sure you're working off the same values. If it continues to happen, I think that's where sometimes the best thing to do is say, hey, call children's ministry, like, hey, do you mind, let's meet with you and your boss. I want to make sure you're hearing what is on our plate, and I want to make sure I understand you on what's on your plate too. Bring their leader into it so that you all are aligned and making sure you're on the same page on that, so that you're not creating turf wars. But it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice the values that you have. It just means your approach for doing that in a healthy way is going to dictate, can you work with that ministry moving forward, or are you creating turf wars that are really hard to win?
Oh, I love that. I want to maybe go a little bit to a different conversation here. And the question I want to ask you is, like, what would you do, or what would you say to a church staff member or a leader in an organization who just can't get a stakeholder above them or aside them on board with sort of changing some of these rhythms? I mean, if there is someone that's listening to this conversation and they're like, no, Phil, Luke, you don't fully understand my situation. I really am in an unhealthy environment where it's just, I have said things, I've gone to my boss, I've tried to correct the pattern, I've done everything that you're saying, I'm following the plan. I mean, it's, months in the process. What would you say to that person who sort of just can't get them to get on board?
What do you want to say, or what do you actually? I mean, yeah, I hate when that happens, because it's just, we've probably all been there, and I hate that. If that's where you are, I'm so sorry. Like, that's because that just feels like a no-win situation. So I get that. I think the question that I'm often asking is not, am I making that leader happy, but am I doing the best I can with what I have? And even if that ministry leader or that pastor is unhappy with what you're doing, if you can truly say, as somebody who is not working for that leader, you're working for God in the ministry that God's called you to under the leadership of that leader, you can say, am I doing the best I can with what I have? And am I communicating, building off the boundaries that I know God would want me to keep, and leaning into that with them? Like, that's got to be your posture on it. And sometimes that means if you continually feel like your boundaries are violated to be able to serve healthily, then maybe that's the time to be able to raise that question with your boss, with that leader, to just invite them into the struggle, and do that in a honoring way, but a vulnerable way on that. And I think often good things are going to come from that. If something toxic comes from that might be a question to say, okay, maybe that's something that I need to wrestle with. Am I in the right seat? Am I in the right role? Am I in the right opportunity? You don't start with that because it's hard, because ministry's hard. Never promised us to be easy. So just because something's hard or a boss isn't perfect, that doesn't mean you say, hey, all right, let me go find somewhere else, because the grass is not always greener. But it does mean you lean in, and it doesn't mean that you have to be stuck in a situation that is unhealthy for you or for your family. family on that, because I don't think that's what God would want for you. But I think he can often use you to work through the messy situations to lead towards something better that's not only going to grow you, but might also help grow the leaders in the organization around you.
I love that. And then, in 2019 at SALT Conference, we actually made our main session theme around the story of Esther, thinking about this whole idea of for such time as this, that she was in many ways, the most toxic of all toxic organizations, where leadership was saying, let's kill the Jews. And her uncle was like, well, maybe you're actually in that seat to be the thing that breaks that toxicity. I love that heart. Exactly. And so not to jump too soon, because God may actually be using you for a very influential sort of time as this. That's killer. Mm-hmm. Chad asks a great question. What are some ways maybe ourselves we can combat the imposter syndrome that so naturally comes up in church world?
Often when imposter syndrome rears its ugly head, it's usually that we have a picture in our mind, or a person in our mind, a church in our mind that we're trying to match up to. And that's really hard right now, because you may feel like you did really good, and then you go your Sunday environment or your project or whatever was awesome, and then you go on YouTube and you quickly are reminded that you're not the best thing out there. But you may be comparing your 1-person team or 5-person team to a church or an environment that's got a team of 40, and you're feeling like you're doing something wrong. And the reality is you may be outperforming what you should because of your incredible leadership, but you still feel like you're failing on that. So just remind yourself, what are you measuring up to? And be reminded that every situation and purpose and calling is different. So focus on faithfulness over focusing on winning any of those battles that you're never going to win as well too. And I think for me, imposter syndrome means as well, not only doing the best with what you can, but it also means is my focus on needing something from the people around me? Do I want people to see me as the best out there, or really good at what I do, or fill in the blank? Do I need something from other people? Because often that's you're putting a burden on somebody else that they're never going to be able to fulfill. And so I think for us, we got to remind ourselves, like I talked about in 2019 with that theme, is my focus on putting Jesus on display in the ministry and the calling that God placed me in. Because ministry is a noble calling, and it's an amazing calling when we put our focus on putting the focus on Jesus instead of trying to get anything that we need from ourselves. So we can be vulnerable in every new role or every new situation where we're saying, hey, I really am bad at this and I'm trying to grow, but I'm going to go after and just do the best I can. God can be put on display when we do that. But when we try to feel like we're matching up to everybody else's version of perfection, or the one that we're putting ourselves to, man, it puts that focus on us, and it's not about us on that. Our job, our focus is to put Jesus on display in everything we do and everything we create. And that when we do that, a lot of things get put in perspective, and it makes that imposter syndrome a lot less heavy when that's our focus.
Wow. Love that. So good. And I think it's so true that even as we started, this idea that we serve as a role of magician in our organization and we have to pull rabbits out of our hat, there's a feeling of accomplishment. There's a feeling of, if I can dare to say the word, ego that comes when we are able to pull a good rabbit out of the hat. And that may get those endorphins running and making us feel like we're successful. But what I love what you just said is essentially what's the ultimate, source or reason of that sort of feeling good? Is it because God was put on display, or is it because our name was put on display? Oh, Phil is the one that if I want to solve an organizational problem, I'm going to go to Phil. I love putting that sort of check and balance in there. This conversation has been so good. There are a couple of questions that are a little bit off topic. So if you've got a little bit of time, I want to go there, because you are a communications expert. You've got a whole bunch of insights on other things outside of sort of unrealistic expectations. You got a second?
Bring it.
All right. So Denise asked this question. There are a number of communications tools available, and everyone has their preference, right? I mean, we could literally spend probably a whole webinar on all the different tools you can implement in your church. How do you, I love this, graciously get everyone, even church members, on the same page to sort of understand this is how our church is going to do it, or this is how our church isn't going to do it? How do you set expectations maybe with church members with all these different tools, all the different sort of models?
Oh goodness, what a great question, Denise. And that, the couple often I try to think about language that will help people get a perspective of how we're trying to lead. And so a couple of things that come to mind are just because you can doesn't mean you should. And we can do everything, but anything, but we can't do everything. And those two things come to mind when it comes to like, you're never going to be able to hit every platform, every option that you have to communicate, especially now. I mean, we could spend all our time on just communicating on one platform, on just Facebook or just Instagram or just Snapchat or whatever it is, TikTok. So what I think is important for us as ministry leaders to do is to get out of that reactive mode and step above it and create our time budget, create our resource budget for the time and the resources you have in this time and this season, and say, what's the way, based off of all that I'm seeing that's out there, what are the best ways to use our resources on that? That helps you get a little bit more perspective of can you versus should you. Can you spend all your time focusing on this platform versus this one? Sure. But should you, based off of the people you're trying to serve, the resources you have, the time and energy you have, that may not be the best option if you are able to step back and look at it all. So that would be my encouragement, to step back on that and to say, for the people that push back, to say, hey, we are always evaluating the best way to use our time and resources on that, but we got to be a good steward of where we are and the resources we have right now. So that's what we're doing. Thanks for your input, and we'll constantly be looking back at that. That's a way to honor their input and appreciation without just saying, oh yeah, of course we can do that, because you may not have that resource, you may not have that time.
Yeah, I love that. People don't know what you care unless they care that until they know that you care, essentially. Valerie, real quick, for you, Phil, do you have any tips, single guidelines, something like that, real quick, for team building when you rely mostly on volunteers? And you've coached people that have this, right? It's not just large organizations with teams, yep. Volunteers. Speak real quickly to that.
Yeah, well, so where this concept of expectations really began to be more clear and everything was specifically with volunteers, because I was realizing for the creative team that we were sometimes expecting things from volunteers that they didn't know we were expecting from them, or the volunteer was expecting things from us as pastors and leaders that we were not realizing that they were holding us to on that. Could give you a lot of examples and reasons, but I think that came down to, like, before, when it comes to a volunteer, the thing that was, foundational for how we build a culture in a team is actually starting off before somebody started serving, is to give them a good sense of, here's the win for this ministry. If you're serving in production, communications, worship, here's our win. Here's why we do what we do. And then here's what you can expect from us. Here's what we're expecting from you. So for example, for worship leaders, for somebody serving in worship ministry, they need to know what your purpose is for worship. It's not just for you to sound good. It's to put Jesus on display in everything we do and give verses behind that and say, what you can expect from us is we're going to coach you because we want to get better. That's the value of ours. You can expect us that we're going to schedule you and give you the music hopefully 2 weeks or more in advance so that you can prepare, because we honor your time. More examples there from that. And then beyond that is, here's what we're expecting from you. We need to know that you're going to check that mark on Planning Center to say, yes, I can, or no, I can't, in a timely fashion. And please, for the love of God, just answer the Planning Center email. So, and we're expecting you to be able to come prepared, because we don't, we need you to come to rehearsal ready to go and all that. When those expectations are violated, you're not just saying, hey, I think we told you about this, but, we're saying, hey, before we started, this is what we knew it was going to take for us to be what we're expecting from you and from us. Hey, and let's work our way through it to try to help it be a win for you and for our ministry on that. So I would use that same framework to make sure that you're being clear for them, and then hold them to it and coach them through it.
Phil, thank you, man. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for pouring out. I mean, if you guys cannot hear this in his voice, he has a huge heart for churches, and he has a huge heart for you. And I just want to take a second to say, Phil's a friend, and so I can say this because I have watched him work. He's a guy I'll call up when I'm facing something, or I'll text him and be like, hey, have you ever seen this challenge before? if what he's sharing today is impactful for you and you would love to invite him into your organization or your team, I want to encourage you to reach out to him, because I really do think that he may be able to come alongside you in a way of an outsider to ask the right questions, to sort of poke a little bit at some of these expectations that are either set before you or something like that. So I want to encourage you to reach out to him. Phil, where can they connect with you if they want to reach out to you in any way, shape, or form, follow you or whatever?
Yeah, I would love to. If there's a question that came up or anything I can do to have your back, please email me. You can email me at phil@philbowdle.com. You can shoot me a text, 678-653-2047. You can, any way you can find me, happy to respond and help any way I can.
Awesome. We'll make sure that we put that into the chat. And if you wanted to pick up his book, we actually have a couple of copies still here at SALT for $10. We'll put the link in the chat. And then if those copies run out or you want to pick it up, we'll put another link in there for some others. But Phil, thank you for being with us. So love having the honor to just chat with you about conversations that mean so much to the church. So thank you, brother.
I love it. Luke, thank you. What I love about SALT is not only you, but the team that is around you that is all focused on serving these leaders that count on you to help, and you do an incredible job. Your team does an incredible job doing that. That's why it's so fun to partner with you all. So thank you for all you're doing.
I appreciate that, man. Thanks. So exciting news. Phil will actually be joining us this year at SALT Conference again. So if you haven't marked your calendars, it's going to be November 15th through 17th here in Nashville, Tennessee. Also, last webinar we announced this. If you haven't gotten a chance to see this or this is your first webinar, we just launched a brand new website with the new theme graphics and branding and all this, and it is just right on par with our 10-year anniversary. So go to salt2023.com to get all the information. Would love for you to be a part of that in some way. You'll get a link to this as a replay if you want to go back and watch this or play some of this for some of your organization, or maybe even digest some of these conversations for your team. You'll get a replay link tomorrow in your inbox, and you'll be able to watch all of our previous ones. And then one last thing before we wrap up and send you out just a couple of minutes early. Next webinar is going to be June 27th, and I'm excited to share that Brian Tabor from Worship Fails is going to be joining us. And so we're going to do something a little bit different next time. We're going to actually talk about some of our greatest fails in the church. So come be ready to laugh at ourselves, with ourselves, if you don't mind. And we may have a little bit of fun interaction with you guys, the community, so that we can make that a conversation and let you guys share some of your best fails. Regardless, we just want you to know we're in your corner, and we want you to be human, and we want you to be you. Don't set unrealistic expectations on yourself or other leaders around you, and go make an impact for the gospel in your neighborhood. Appreciate you guys. Have a great day.